Welcome all to the Amateur's Guide to Shogi. This time is a little bit different because I'm actually going to be playing a game myself instead of recapping them or doing puzzles. Now, the reason for that is even though there are plenty of much better players than myself out there whose games you can watch, I feel that for beginners, someone who is closer to their level, their explanation of my thought process could be more beneficial than trying to understand these high-level players and what on earth they're doing. I recall when I was starting out, it was a bit of a gateway to try and get into it like that. And also I want to hopefully address something that I found in terms of trying to learn Shogi from scratch, is that unlike, say, chess, for example, there is a severe lack of generalizations, is what I will call it. And I'll explain more once I get into a game. So I'm going to play with a computer, just so that I can give myself lots and lots of time so that I don't have to worry about running out of time by, in a regular game while I'm talking. And also because there might be some, ethical implications of filming someone without their knowledge. I could ask them first, but it's just easier to do it this way. So I'm going to play black, just for simplicity's sake. And here we go. So we've got, let me just make sure my headphones are plugged in. Okay. This is the level 1 engine, the lowest engine on Shogi, which is I'm playing because, this is, if you're a beginner, this is the engine that you'll be playing if you play on Shogi. As far as engines go, it's actually a very strong first level, is what I will say. There are other apps and websites such as Pure Shogi, which have a lot more bots, and their level starts out lower. So if you're starting out and you are struggling to beat even the level 1 bot on Shogi and feeling sad, don't worry, it is quite an advanced first level bot. Okay, anyway, let's begin. I'm going to play a climbing silver strategy, rapid attack strategy, because if you're a beginner and you master this, you can very easily win against bots and other beginners because they don't know how to handle such a quick attack. But I will go over some simple castling as well, because castling is still important even in a rapid attack. Okay, so I've opened with my rook pawn. They've opened with their bishop pawn, which is the two most common openings. You either get this or this or this. Other common opening is to open with the king's pawn, if you're playing central rook, for example. Now, regardless of if you're playing this strategy, if you're playing black and you're trying to play this sort of climbing silver strategy, regardless of what they do first, pretty much, you just move. You keep pushing the pawn. Keep pushing the pawn. Okay, so they're actually going to be playing ranging rook, which is interesting. I wasn't anticipating that. But regardless, we will continue going. So the first thing I'd like to address is, in terms of what I said before about there's a lack of generalizations. What I mean by that is, say in chess, there's a lot of generalizations that you can make about how to form a game plan. Instead of learning specific lines or theory or anything like that, you can just make a generalization and say, yeah, you want to develop all your pieces towards the center, control the center, that sort of thing, in chess anyway. And in Shogi there's some of that, but to be honest, there's not a lot, and it's a more complex game, so I feel like, if anything, it should have more generalizations. So the generalizations that there are usually in the form of proverbs, which you may have heard of before, but even those are, you can look up lists of them online, just look up Shogi proverbs, and they can be useful to get some background information. But in terms of forming a game plan, sometimes you can't really rely on the proverbs. So what my suggestion would be, as a beginner, if you're playing sort of like a static rook opening, but for most openings as well, but especially this sort of rapid attack opening, your game plan should be, first and foremost, to make a dragon. So dragon is a promoted rook. So it means you need to get rook to one of these 3 squares. That should just be your game plan. Why? Because the dragon promoted rook is by far the most powerful piece on the board. And as far as if you're a beginner, it's the best tool in the beginner's toolbox in terms of mating. If you want to mate your opponent, definitely the most useful thing to have on the board would be a dragon for a beginner. As you get stronger, you'll get better at using some of the other pieces. But the reason I say this is that, well, I mean, obviously it's the most powerful piece on the board, but also in terms of English speakers, who, my target audience, very rarely have you usually come across shogi before, but very commonly you've come across chess before, even if you haven't played it a ton. And in chess, using a rook is very simple. And in shogi, it's the same. And if you're already used to chess rooks, then you should be used to the shogi rook. So it's a very simple piece to wrap your head around in the beginning. And it also, this is generalization, it just gives you a good game plan. Game plan, just get a dragon. First thing, priority is, castling is one of them, but you want to get a dragon. So I'm going to play Climbing Silver, and this is where you just lift the silver and run it along the rook file. And they're actually playing Static Rook. That is interesting. Usually if you hop the bishop up there to protect this square, it usually means that you're going to bring the rook to one of these three squares. But anyway, not that I'm complaining. And that's also a bit of a bizarre move. Doesn't really accomplish a whole lot. I'm going to lift this pawn here to protect the silver when I go here. They might respond with this. Okay. And we need to do some accounting, obviously. So if we, for example, push this pawn, they would take, and then, I would take, and then they would take, and then takes, and then they would end up winning that exchange with the bishop. So we shouldn't do that. Instead, what we can do is perhaps get a knight into the mix, or simply just start castling. Since they are in fact playing Static Rook by the looks of things, that means that we are going to be castling into Crab Castle. I would recommend playing this move anyway, because this is basically Boat Castle already if they're playing Ranging Rook. But if they're playing Static Rook, you can start making Crab Castle just by moving this gold. Okay, here's another generalization. If your opponent is playing Static Rook, and you're playing, especially if you're playing Static Rook, the second pawn move that they make, your almost instant response should just be to move this gold here. Protects the bishop, protects this pawn. Very important, because it protects against if they drop a pawn here. If you had, for example, if you didn't do that, then this square is just basically very weak. So you should almost always just lift it there. And this is what you want to do for your castle anyway. And in fact, at the moment, Crab Castle is almost completely formed. You just want to lift the silver up and scoot the king over one square, and that will be a fully formed Crab Castle. So, Crab Castle is very strong against a frontal attack. Obviously, you're protecting all of these squares many times. It's quite weak from the side, though, obviously. So that's why you wouldn't play it against Ranging Rook, because if they're playing Ranging Rook, they would have like a rook here, and they would try and get the rook down and attack you from the side. But since they're playing Static Rook, they're trying to attack straight from the front. This castle can also easily turn into Yagura if you want to take the extra time. But if you're trying to do a rapid attack like me, it's much simpler to just lift, lift, and then scoot the king over one square. You sandwich the silver between the two golds and scoot the king over. Very simple. Okay, I don't want to allow this to capture, so I'm just going to take myself. And he will probably pawn trade, take with the rook. It's very common. And I will simply kick him back. He can't take this because it is protected. Okay, now I'm going to open up my bishop's diagonal because I want to get my bishop into the attack. And possibly this knight, eventually. Okay. I also want to get this knight into the attack, preferably. Or alternatively, unfortunately, I think my sort of silver attack has fizzled a bit, so I'll have to try and switch strategies here. But in terms of, my generalizations in this game plan, so far, castling is one good thing to always do. In fact, you could start the game by doing this if you wanted to. It's a little bit unconventional, but you could. Nothing's stopping you. Open up the bishop and develop this silver into an attacking piece with the rook. Game plan is still to get a dragon. That is still game plan number one, right? Now, the problem is we need to figure out how to do that. I mean, usually I wouldn't even recommend playing climbing silver against this sort of bishop strategy. But, that was what I had planned, and I'm not going to change it now. So there are two ideas that I have here. The first is we could do a strategy called spearing the sparrow, which is when you lift the lance up and put the rook in behind, which forms a battery, if you know the term from chess, which would add another attacker to this square, so we could try and push this pawn and then basically barrel through and bring the rook in behind and make that dragon. Okay. Or alternatively, we could try and push this pawn twice and attack this here because it's on the bishop's head, which is very weak. And it's also closer to the king. And it also allows our knight out towards the center, which is good. I think I'm going to do this first. Another generalization, and I think this is also a proverb, is attack the bishop's head. So the bishop's head being the square right in front of it, because it's very weak because the bishop obviously is not defending it. So we're going to full steam ahead with this pawn. Okay, they have ignored it, which is a little bit weird because we can trade off, and then whatever they take back with, we will then attack with our pawn and bring in the silver behind, which allows us to then push this pawn and hopefully barrel through with the rook behind. So I think that is what I'm going to do. Okay, and promote. Okay. And after I've got some pieces in my hand, which will bring me to my next sort of generalization. Probably... sorry, let me finish my point. Which, pieces in hand will be the topic of my next sort of generalization and game plan phase. I guess I should call them phases. Phase 1, castle. Phase 2, get a dragon. Phase 3, the next part. But let me try and complete phase 2 of getting the dragon first before I move on to the next topic. So I think just attacking, they can take, but then I can just drop and push them back, maybe. Or even, it would be nice if I could bishop here, but alas, I cannot. Oh, but you know what, I can't, oh no, I can't. That's another fork, but it is covered by the knight, unfortunately. Oh, but you know what has opened up now? Because the bishop is gone, they've lost a defender of this square. So I can now actually do this. Should I resolve this first? Yeah, probably. They'll probably just take, and that will allow me to push this pawn. That is an interesting idea. Yeah, sort of a fork, but not really. This is defended, but it is hitting this unprotected lance, which could be pretty dangerous. I think I'm just going to block it with the knight. Nice and simple. Oh, they're attacking the knight's head. That's quite clever. Can I... I defend? Or do I just... I could also just... Well, no, I can't really push that because it just takes. Good strategy to defend against a bishop is to just use your own bishop. This is probably not a very good drop, but, you know, it serves its purpose. Obviously, you're going to recapture if they trade, which they do. Oh, they might drop it again, actually. Oh, okay. That's interesting. I'll save my knight. This is very dangerous, obviously. Yeah, okay, so they want to do this again. But I think this time I can just protect it with the gold. They really want this horse dead, this knight dead, rather. I mean, obviously it's dead regardless of where it goes, so I think I just ignore it and go for this strong attack over here. That's a little bit weird, but okay. Just allows me in. What do I want to do? Obviously, I can't take that. What I can do, though, is this. Protecting against the bishop with the bishop. Okay, I'm just going to take. He'll probably, yep, trade. He's sort of breaking my castle here, but that's okay. Yeah, okay, that's a nothing move. Obviously, I don't want to allow a Tolkien to establish itself here, so I'm just going to quickly take that. Okay, finally, I've got my turn, so I am going to advance this, because I still want to get this dragon. Oh, wait. Okay. I was just thinking, well, there was a bishop fork here, king rook fork, but I could have blocked it with this bishop drop and traded off bishop for rook. Probably just take backwards. Still this idea. Or we'll just do this. Okay, just a waste of a pawn. Waste of another pawn. I've noticed that the lower level computers do this sometimes. They just keep repeating moves over and over again. That's okay. Okay. Finally, we can, you know, go for our game plan of getting a dragon here. I think I could scoot here and attack this gold and try and promote that way, but I think this is going to be a better attack because once the gold moves, I can chase it and attack all three, bringing in the rook in behind. And I mean, I can just I can almost just ignore that and take this. Because then if it takes, this check is pretty ugly. Because the only move is here, and then... I mean, it's not mate, but it's not nice, certainly. I could also scoot over here. Tax this bishop. And the rook, and the gold. And that would be a 1 square gap dragon. Can do this, but I would just take. Okay, interesting. So this is obviously getting very dangerous for them. King's still in the center. I'm about to finally get this dragon that I've been wanting. I can scoot across. Or even scoot across this way. Or I can even just take this pawn with a check, which I might do just for simplicity's sake. Okay. To be expected. And now I'm going to, now that he's used that silver, I'm going to come back, threaten the gold, and the knight behind it. He can block with a knight here, which he's not going to do. He's defended it laterally. That's interesting. Clever, clever. I do have a fork here and here, which I think I'm going to do. That's dangerous. Okay. This is interesting, actually. I wonder if I have a mate. It's got to be close, because the king can't come forward, and like, for example, what if I just like threw a silver here? The rook's got to move. If the rook takes it, it's just mate. Silver, if the rook has to stay on this file, so he can't stay here or here. If he goes here, probably, or here, here, or here, probably just take with the horse, and then take this gold. If he goes here, I can also chuck a bishop here to attack this gold. Although that doesn't attack the rook, so the rook technically doesn't have to move. I'm going to try it. Maybe the computer's stupid. That's interesting. What should I do? Well, if I take here, that allows him to take back. If I take here and he takes, then I can take. And of course, if I take is also good. I think I'll just do this. If takes, then obviously take, and that's very dangerous. He's completely cut off. He's got no escape route over here. This is, yeah, that's just a, it's not quite a mate because of this. Although I can drop a, or even a rook here, has to block. And then gold here. Can run the, I don't want to allow that. Or I can even drop a rook here, because it pins the gold. The gold can't move. And obviously if you take, it's gold on the head. Try that. And you can block, but it's just going to be mate. Just going to be mate. Okay. Well, unfortunately, I didn't really get to my third phase there. I sort of just kept playing because the computer sort of walked itself into a hole before I got a chance to. Maybe that'll come up more in another video. But I was going to talk about drops, dropping pieces on the board. Because there's, I don't know if it's a proverb, but it's commonly sort of said that if you've got, more than 3 pieces in your hand, you're probably missing a good drop or something. And I've noticed that beginners sometimes can be one of 2 things. They can either be very trigger happy with their drops because of that saying, but also because, it's fancy, it's different from chess, and they're like, oh, I've got a ton of pieces, so I can do things with them. And they usually, either, drop and lose a piece, or they drop for like a 1-turn benefit, like a 1-turn attack, which doesn't really accomplish anything towards their main goal. The other option is that often beginners completely forget that drops are a thing at all, because they're not used to having them if they're used to chess, which can also be a problem. But what I would suggest, what I was going to say for phase 3, is just it's fine to stockpile pieces. It's fine to stockpile pieces. I mean, sure, if you find a nice drop and you think, oh, that's a really good drop, sure, play it. And if it's a mistake, I mean, you'll learn from the mistake. But just what I would say is, don't be trigger happy with your drops, even if professionals keep saying, or strong players keep saying, like, oh, drops are really important. They are important, but you can still accomplish a lot without a lot of drops. And the problem is, if you drop poorly because you kind of don't really know what a good drop is, or what a good drop accomplishes, then you can run out of pieces in your hand. And if you've run out of pieces in your hand, then the chances that you can pull off a mate is very slim. So if we sort of go back and analyze some of this, perhaps. Although what you will notice in terms of mating is that I ended up with 2 dragons. So my phase 2 was sort of correct. You want dragons. They are the best mating tool. I used a few tactics in here, which is trying to remove the defenders sort of idea. But in terms of, let's see if I can find like drops. Pretty much the only drops I did were, I think, in this whole game, it actually kind of illustrates my point. Pretty much the only drops that I did this game were defensive drops. For example, I dropped there because I needed to defend against the attack. And that's when you run out of ideas, your mind naturally goes to drops, and you're like, oh, okay, well, what can I drop to defend against this? Up here, another defensive move. Bishop. Just pushing. My pawn, base bishop. And there we go. Okay. So notice how, up until this point, I hadn't dropped at all, except for a couple of defensive drops, bishop for bishop, basically. Until the end game. This is most definitely an end game, because the king is still in the center, and I've got a rook ready and rearing to become a dragon, and I've assembled quite a few pieces in my hand. Because I wasn't, I could have, way back when I was trying to make this dragon, I was trying to make a big attack. Like, a lot of beginners will do drops like, oh, I don't know, in this position, they'll be like, oh, well, I can drop a bishop. Where would you even drop a bishop? I don't know. Here, to attack this pawn or something. Or later on, you've got this bishop and you're like, oh, well, I can drop a bishop here and attack the silver. And like, that probably isn't a terrible drop, but also it doesn't accomplish a ton. And as a beginner, you should this is clearly not a mating situation, right? You want to have a stockpile of stuff in your hand that you can use for a mate, because that's how you win the game. If you can't mate, you can't win. So don't, just because you've got the pieces in your hand doesn't mean you have to use them. And just, find to build up a bit of a stockpile and you eventually use it to do a mating attack. So in this case, I had a nice fork. I'm bringing in a bunch of pieces closer to their king. I'm trying to mate, and they allow me to do that. And this drop here was a tactic. Because if they move, I'll just show you that. It's mate in 1. Whoops, that's not what I meant to do. Mate in 1. Nothing you can do. So that was, that's another drop. It's a mating drop. It's a tactic because either I win a rook, or they have to move the rook somewhere, or I mate. I win the game. Now, of course, they could have scooted the rook over, say, here or something. At which point, I probably would have just taken, and they could have taken, and I would have not done that. Taken this, sort of cutting off the king's escaping route this way, threatening the goal. There's ideas of sacking and stuff like that, and you can also take these pieces if you need them. But more importantly, this was a multi-purpose drop. It attacked the rook, and there was that tactic there, but also the king's escaping route in this direction is gone, right? The king has a couple squares to run to, but he's not getting out, right? And this dragon is cutting him off this way. So even if they had not chosen to sack the rook, even if they had run the rook away, this silver was still a good drop because it's preventing the king from escaping. So it's drops like that where they have an explicit mating purpose is when you want to start using your stockpile. And of course, this was another one. This was another tactic. It's, as I explained in the game, it's pinning the gold to the king so the gold can't scoot away. And the gold can't move back or anything because that would just be mate on the spot. And the gold can't take because that would also just be mate on the spot. I will show you. Gold on the head, most common mate, especially for beginners. So that was my phase 3, of the game. Phase 3 of the game, sort of mid to end game. Don't be too trigger happy with your drops. Find to build up a stockpile as a generalization and use that to mate your opponent. So in terms of summary of this video, when versing other beginners or lower level computers, as a generalization, phase 1, quickly castle your king. Phase 2, try and get a dragon. It was a bit of a long and convoluted process in this particular game, but that eventually is what I managed to do. That was overall across for probably 60 moves of this 100 move game was me just trying to get this dragon. Slowly making progress towards getting a dragon, and then as you've noticed, once I got the dragon, I managed to mate within not many moves at all. And then of course phase 3, build up a bit of a stockpile which you can use to mate your opponent. So hopefully those 3 sort of generalizations and the way that I've explained them are a little bit useful to any of you beginners out there, and I hope you enjoyed, I hope you learned something, and I hope you continue watching my other videos. Thanks for watching, everyone. Bye.